Hollywood destroys people, but Robert Downey Jr. came into the industry with his own set of demons. His father introduced him to drugs at just 6 years old, and he spent the first half of his career trying to convince himself he wasn't addicted. But he couldn't even show up to a simple interview while sober. And they wound up cutting me out of the film. And all my friends jumped in. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. Humility. Got it right here. Sign, seal, delivered. Up yours. Robert would eventually lose control, spiraling so far that he ended up in federal prison. But even prison could not fix him. And when RDJ stepped back into the world, he was faced with a reality he'd been avoiding his entire life. Keep numbing himself until it killed him, or confront the toxic lifestyle that Hollywood had been enabling since he was a child. And his decisions, along with a little help from another troubled actor, led him down a path no one expected him to survive. Robert was set up for failure at age 6 when his father handed him some marijuana to smoke, something Robert's father deeply regrets to this day. A lot of us did things and thought it would be hypocritical to not have our kids participate in marijuana and stuff like that, so we thought it was cute to let them smoke it and all that. It was an idiot move on our part. By age 8, RDJ was abusing alcohol, only to start experimenting with harder drugs as a young teen. By then, both Robert Downey Jr. and Sr. had become codependent addicts. He said there was always a lot of pot around. When my dad and I would do drugs together, it was like him trying to express his love for me in the only way he knew how. Of course, this created a horrible foundation for the young actor, but he had no way of escaping it because his dad was a small-time director in New York City and RDJ didn't see any other life other than being an actor. I don't know if I ever really had that thought that this is what I'm going to do. It never occurred to me to do anything else. And it just kind of, life happens. But make no mistake, Robert Downey Jr. is far from a Nepo baby. If you weren't a film buff in the 70s, odds are you wouldn't have heard of any of his father's films. He was known for obscure and experimental films, gaining a reputation for hiring people off the street instead of holding auditions. But status didn't mean anything to a young RDJ. He admired his father's dedication to his craft. Well, I remember, him being a writer and a director. I remember when I was 8 years old, like I was in a movie of his, but it seemed kind of natural to me, like, well, this is just what I'm doing. Daddy's making this, and I'm doing it, too. So, I really admire my father, and it seemed like he had a really good time and really got to communicate to a lot of people his kind of ideas, wacky or not, Unfortunately, as a teenager and into young adulthood, Robert Downey Jr. had the mindset that he could get drunk and high as much as he wanted as long as he was able to do his job on set. He said, "I took my drugs after work and on the weekends. Maybe I'd turn up hungover on the set, but no more so than the stuntman." He was essentially developing the lifestyle of a functioning addict. But whenever Downey started to be recognized for his talent, the money and fame allowed him to feed this empty space inside his soul. Robert didn't know it yet, but success in the industry would make him lose the control he thought he had over his addiction. But before we dive deeper, as I've gotten older, I sometimes think it's time to start taking my own health a little more seriously. I have a handful of different symptoms that I try to self-diagnose online instead of doing the right thing and going to a professional. That's why I was so relieved when I found today's video sponsor, ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors, all based on your own preferences. You can search through the 200-plus specialties offered on ZocDoc, see which doctors take your insurance, and read real reviews from real patients before deciding who feels like the right fit for you. They have over 150,000 providers across all 50 states, covering everything from primary care and dentistry to dermatology and eye care. You can book in-person or video visits, see real-time availability, and schedule instantly with no phone calls required. Appointments made through ZocDoc typically happen fast, often within 24 to 72 hours, and sometimes even the same day. Stop putting off doctor's appointments and find a doctor who will care and understand you. Go to zocdoc.com/PatrickCC, also linked in the description, to find and instantly book an appointment with a top-rated in-network doctor today. In the 1980s, Robert Downey Jr. was acting alongside the Hollywood powerhouse known as the Brat Pack, which had massive stars like Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, Emilio Estevez, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, Anthony Michael Hall, and Demi Moore. While this gave him a lot of opportunities to be on screen, securing roles in Weird Science and The Pickup Artist, almost all of the films he acted in were considered duds, like he was carrying some kind of curse. Didn't seem to get a lot of great response, at the box office. But I really enjoyed it. Now what? Like all the other blockbusters I've been in. What are you talking about? I'm like the nose-dive king for films. Robert, we'd like to have him in a film, but you jinxed the whole darn effort. He had gotten good reviews in mostly bad films, which had critics feeling like he was a star waiting to be born. And in an unexpected twist of fate, his connection to the Brat Pack actually landed him a job as an on-screen cast member for Saturday Night Live. Do you remember the audition? Yeah, I did some really dumb stuff. I pulled my shirt over my head and did some sort of bodega running character. I did another guy, a British guy who all he wanted to do was put a piece of tape on your head. It was really weird, super avant-garde stuff. Getting a job on SNL used to be a springboard to launching a comedian's career, but RDJ wasn't an aspiring comedian. Therefore, his performance on the show was bad. I know why whales beach themselves. Spider-Man told me life is an emergency and my books are overdue. No thanks to you. Young Robert Downey Jr. is living proof that fame is a heck of a drug. Rolling Stone would go on to rank RDJ as the worst cast member in SNL history. Luckily, the big break Robert needed was actually just right around the corner when he got a role in Less Than Zero, a movie about a college freshman named Clay, played by Andrew McCarthy, returning home to see his hometown completely different from how he left it. Downey plays his ex-girlfriend's drug supplier and lover, Julian. Downey's character was a complete mess. He loses a gig with a record label, his connection to his family, and spirals into crack addiction to the point where he sells his body just to get high. And while this might sound like an exciting role in the 2020s, playing a crazed addict that turns to prostitution in a 1980s movie was a huge risk for a new actor, but RDJ didn't seem to care. He said, "No one likes touching those weird subjects, and I think those are the kinds of roles that I want to do." I thought I might have a good shot at getting the part because I really couldn't see many of my peers being able to handle playing a... I was so happy I got cast. I think a lot of actors were turned off to it because Julian has, bisexual encounters, but you can't be paranoid about what people are going to think. I was playing someone who drove a $60,000 Avanti to school every morning and was strung out on crack. However, acting in these party films wasn't great for controlling his vices. He was gaining an offset reputation for being a bit of a troublemaker. Members of the cast and crew gossip that the movie's director told Robert and Andrew to go out partying to understand their characters, only for Robert Downey Jr. to run off drunk. He was allegedly found by police howling at the moon and brought to jail where McCarthy had to bail him out hours later. Even Robert admitted, "I did Less Than Zero with a director who understood what I didn't, which is we're doing something incredibly artistic. This guy is a mess and probably going to get worse, but he's not as bad as the character he's playing." And that director was right because RDJ would continue to skyrocket into fame, which meant more money and more access to drugs. Robert Downey Jr. had finally broken away from the Brat Pack in the late 80s, acting in experimental films like 1969, That's Adequate, True Believer, and Air America, a Vietnam action comedy alongside Mel Gibson. This film got Robert a massive marketing boost across national television and radio shows, nudging him closer to A-list fame. It's also where he developed a friendship with an actor who would later save his life. Ironically, though, the film that took him to the next level was another flop where he got to act as the silent movie legend Charlie Chaplin. Just about every day there would be something fun, a chicken outfit or a scene from another film or, a cool hat or riding horses with Fairbanks. And It's just been just about the most darn glamorous thing you could imagine. Chaplin didn't even make $10 million at the box office, but it's a cult classic for the fans that did tune in. Plus, it was also the role that gave Robert an Oscar nomination, which finally put him ahead of his peers as an established actor. But what made fans love Downey even more was when he stepped outside of his comfort zone with a documentary titled The Last Party. A camera crew followed him as he made fun of political conventions and how a large part of American society is motivated by wealth and power more so than helping their fellow man. The most notable moment of the doc was when Downey went down into the pit to observe the New York Stock Exchange. If money is evil, then that building is hell. This is the most obnoxious group of money-hungry, low IQ, high-energy, jackrabbit wannabe big-time, small-time, talking, bothersome, irritating bunch of people I have ever had to endure for more than 5 minutes. He is spot on, and things haven't changed. Now to the public, RDJ seemed to be peaking in life, ascending through the Hollywood ranks, acting in much bigger movies with massive stars like Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers, Only You, and Richard III with Sir Ian McKellen. But behind the scenes, his personal life was finally starting to take a serious dive. His longtime girlfriend, Sarah Jessica Parker, had broken up with him after several warnings about his drug usage. Downey had originally thought that he was able to balance his professional life and dependence on cocaine. But his drug habits got so bad that Hollywood tried to kick him out of the industry for good, leaving him homeless and totally alone. In 1995, Robert Downey Jr. was working on the film Home for the Holidays. It was a dramedy where he played a character named Tommy Larson, who is the black sheep of the family. However, if you asked Downey, he wouldn't be able to remember he was working on a movie at all. Cocaine wasn't enough for him anymore, and he had moved on to using straight-up heroin. You know how it goes, and people say, well, yeah, he's a fall-down drunk, but he's always at work at 8 a.m. It's like, that's kind of missing something. He's great with the kids. Don't let him drive. How could you do that? Or was that a standard for yourself? You say, well, look, I may be smoking black tar, but I'm going to show up on time. That's not entirely true because I could be found in the trailer like, what are you doing, Robert? We're 5 minutes away. I'd be like, I'm building a space shuttle out of, toothpicks. Whatever. I mean, my behavior was a little aberrant. And while Downey was still able to technically do his job, actress Jodie Foster knew he was losing control. Jodie told the Huffington Post she had to pull RDJ aside at one point in the middle of a shoot and have a very serious conversation with him. And I said, so far, you are on a bar stool and you have managed to not fall off the bar stool. It's possible that you're going to find a way to prop yourself up, whatever toothpicks it takes to prop yourself up, but I'm afraid for you, and now may not be the time, but I am afraid for you. Foster clearly understood that Robert was playing a game that only ended in tragedy. But unfortunately, he wasn't at a point where he was willing to listen. He had received several interventions, followed by rehab, but the recovery never lasted long. In 1996, Sean Penn and Dennis Quaid actually kicked his door down before dragging him to a long-term abuse facility. What he did was he kicked my door down. The door flies off the hinges, and there's Sean Penn in that leather jacket like it's time to pay the piper. Now, at the time, Robert looked at all of his antics and addictions as a big joke. Like how he recalled playing ping pong with Tom Cruise and drunkenly scared him to death. One of the first times I met Tom Cruise was at my friend's house and we were playing ping pong, right? He's like, let's do something competitive. Playing ping pong with him, and I'm ecstatic because he's clearly wiped me out 21-4. Yeah. But then I jumped the net. I splintered this thing into about 6,000 pieces, clearly hammered. What did Tom do? He was just feeling fear and sadness. I think he's rocking the coke jaw. He had a real problem. Glad he put all that behind him. Now, up until this point, Robert Downey Jr. was able to use his humor and charisma to make the audience love him. He was far from the only person in Hollywood doing drugs or jumping on tables. But the public's opinion of him started to drastically change after a major arrest. He was caught speeding past sheriff's deputies on the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, California. When police finally caught up with him, they found cocaine, black tar heroin, and an unloaded .357 Magnum revolver hidden in his pickup truck. But it gets worse. Just hours after being charged, he continued to take more drugs. He got so high that he mistook a neighbor's house for his own. When the homeowners, Bill and Lisa Curtis, arrived at the house, they found pants neatly laid over a chair, only to find Robert Downey Jr. tucked away in an empty bed. Surprisingly, Lisa tried to explain to the press that they just feared for his safety. He was sitting up groggy, looking very white and gaunt, and at no time was he doing anything the least bit threatening. After calling the police, Downey was revived by paramedics. And even at this low point, the Curtis family said that he made sure to make the children laugh so that they weren't scared, making funny faces to distract them from a serious arrest. While Downey got off with probation and a slap on the wrist, this image of him in a courtroom severely damaged his career, and he was back to acting in smaller films like Danger Zone, Two Girls and a Guy, and Hugo Pool, a low-budget film directed by his father, who had since become sober. RDJ did have a memorable spot in the lawyer sitcom Ally McBeal, but even his brief stint in television wasn't meant to last. In 1999, Downey found himself in court after multiple parole violations. And Malibu Superior Court Judge Lawrence J. Mira told him he was manipulative and had exhausted the court's options for drug rehabilitation and the court's patience, and sentenced the actor to 3 years in prison for repeatedly violating probation on drug and weapons charges. According to RDJ, prison was absolute hell, but he still managed to find humor in an environment where he was always in danger. 2 weeks later, I'm in a place called Delano, which is a receiving center where they decide where you're going to go. Arguably the most dangerous place I've ever been in my life, because nobody is designated if they're a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 criminal. Yes. And you could just feel the evil in the air. And that was no trouble at all, because it was kind of like just being in a really bad neighborhood. And there was no opportunity there. There was only threats. Yes. Everyone is going to take your wallet, so watch it. And I remember walking out when I popped out of my cell to go to the shower. I didn't know it, but I was a little spun out and I had my underwear on backwards. That put the entry area. It's an invitation, really. You know what I mean. And I remember eliciting some strong chuckles and jeers from my fellow inmates. Ultimately, Downey only spent 15 months in prison. The only thing that saved him from serving a full sentence was a legal technicality that said the judge failed to fully outline the nature of time served. But sadly, his experience with being fearful every day in prison did not keep him from being found in the middle of a relapse. 4 months later in Palm Springs, he was caught with marijuana and coke. He was fired from the cast of Ally McBeal and was officially blacklisted from major studios. It appeared to be the final nail in the coffin of Robert Downey Jr.'s career. When asked about his success on the show and the loss, Downey said, "For some people, that's the litmus test. Will he ever be as good again as he was on Ally McBeal? I'm probably not the best person to ask about that period. It was my lowest point in terms of addictions. At that stage, I didn't give a care whether I ever acted again." With so many arrests and a mountain of legal fees, Robert Downey Jr. was seen as a train wreck to agents and a complete liability. Many people don't know this part of the industry, but most actors in major films and TV shows have to be insured for possible accidents. One agency that actually once represented Robert told the press, "Yes, this can seriously damage your future in this town. There's too much young talent on the rise, too much competition. Nobody wants someone that's high maintenance, and it can be a detriment at his age." Due to his drug abuse, it was impossible to find a company that would insure him. And because he couldn't get insured, that meant that he couldn't work. And since he couldn't work, that meant he couldn't pay his legal bills, which led to him actually losing his home. And at this point, it looked like the once Oscar-nominated actor was going to fade away from Hollywood completely. But at his lowest moment, there was one actor who reached down to offer Robert some help. That man was Mel Gibson. Mel was also frequently entrenched in controversy due to him succumbing to his addictions. So they shared that experience, and Robert eventually came forward and shared the truth about how he miraculously saved his life. I asked Mel to present this award to me for a reason, because when I couldn't get sober, he told me not to give up hope, and he urged me to find my faith. Didn't have to be his or anyone else's as long as it was rooted in forgiveness. And I couldn't get hired. So he cast me in the lead of a movie that was actually developed for him, and he kept a roof over my head, and he kept food on the table. And most importantly, he said that if I accepted responsibility for my wrongdoings, and if I embraced that part of my soul that was ugly, hugging the cactus, he calls it. He said that if I hugged the cactus long enough, I'd become a man of some humility, and that my life would take on a new meaning. And I did, and it worked. All he asked in return was that someday I help the next guy. Mel later told the press that Robert thanking him at this award show was during one of Mel's lowest moments. One time I got into a bit of a sticky situation where it kind of ended my career. Mel said, I was drunk in the back of a police car and I said some stupid stuff, and all of a sudden I'm blacklisted. I'm the poster boy for cancelled. A couple of years into that, he invited me to some kind of award he was getting. We always had this kind of seesaw thing where if he was on the wagon, I was falling off. And if I was on the wagon, he was falling off. So I was pretty much non-existent in Hollywood at the time. And he stood up and spoke for me. It was a bold and generous and kind gesture. I loved him for that. And whatever you think about Mel Gibson, he did turn out to be a selfless friend. He went above and beyond for someone who was essentially just a co-worker at the time. Aside from putting a roof over Robert's head and keeping him safe, Gibson also personally put his money on the line to insure RDJ for the film The Singing Detective when nobody else would. Robert said, I was never being flippant when I used to say that I didn't need an acting career. When I said it, it was like saying to someone you love, I don't need you. You never loved me anyway. And you're just a twisted person. It's a form of creative cruelty. I feel differently now. For a long time, I needed to make a movie that edged Chaplin. With The Singing Detective, I think I finally edged it. It's made me realize that I have too much to lose to mess up again and go back to the mess that I was. Robert clearly recognized that he had way too much potential to waste and that this was his final chance in Hollywood, so he needed to stay clean. He also started dating a woman named Susan Levin on the set of an earlier movie called Gothica. 2 years later, they got married. According to Susan, none of this would have really worked if he had been going down the same path just a few years before they started going out. She said, also, the guy I met was not that person. He was clean and sober, completely professional when he was working. And then in the off hours, he was just a fun guy. More than anything, I never doubted it. There was something in my gut that knew really quickly. I knew 3 months in that this was it. The only condition that Susan had for their new marriage was that Robert could never go back to the way things were. If she ever found him with a hard drug in his possession, she would leave him and never come back. And this really seemed to put Downey in his place. It was the moment that he decided to never touch alcohol or drugs ever again. But he had almost completely destroyed his reputation in Hollywood. So they didn't just automatically forgive him. Downey was now fighting an uphill battle. He needed to prove he could stay clean, stay married, and find work. And by doing that, he would eventually get the role that changed his career forever.